Step back, lady. First-class boarding is for people who actually belong there, not whatever this is. The words sliced through the humid air of Chicago O'Hare Terminal 2 like a blade through silk. Sharp, deliberate, and designed to humiliate. Marcus Riley didn't whisper them. He didn't hide them behind professional courtesy or corporate speak. He said them loud enough for the entire gate area to hear. Loud enough for the businessman in the Armani suit to chuckle. Loud enough for the family with matching Louis Vuitton luggage to exchange knowing glances. Loud enough for Dr. Vanessa Hayes to feel the familiar sting of being told she didn't belong in a space she had every right to occupy. But Marcus Riley had no idea who he was talking to. He had no idea that the woman standing in front of him in worn jeans and a Chicago Bears hoodie wasn't just another passenger trying to sneak into first class. He had no idea she was the lead engineer who designed the very safety protocols he claimed to enforce. And he definitely had no idea that in exactly 18 minutes his words would ground every single flight in the terminal and end his career forever. Before we dive into this story, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about one gate agent's arrogance meeting one passenger's power. This is about what happens when someone's worst assumptions crash headlong into the truth. This is about a mother racing against time to save her child's life and the man who almost cost her everything. And this is about how one moment of bias can cascade into consequences that change an entire industry. So buckle in, because what you're about to witness will make you question every assumption you've ever made about who belongs where and why dignity should never depend on what someone is wearing. The clock on the departure board read 6:47 p.m., December 23rd. Outside Gate C-15, a blizzard had transformed Chicago into a snow globe with visibility dropping to near zero and wind gusts powerful enough to rock the massive aircraft parked at the gates. Inside the terminal, the air tasted like stale pretzels, recycled anxiety, and the particular desperation that only comes from thousands of holiday travelers trapped in an airport during the storm of the decade. Dr. Vanessa Hayes stood in the priority boarding line clutching a worn canvas messenger bag against her chest like armor. Inside that bag were medical documents that could save her 8-year-old daughter's life. Maya Hayes was lying in a hospital bed 3,000 miles away in London, her congenital heart defect finally requiring the surgery that only one doctor in the world could perform. Dr. Harrison Webb at the London Heart Institute had agreed to operate, but the window was closing. If Vanessa didn't make it to London with Maya's complete medical history and the specialized surgical plans she'd spent 6 months helping to develop, her daughter would die. She didn't look like a first-class passenger. She looked like exactly what she was. A single mother who had been living in hospitals for weeks wearing the same clothes she'd slept in, running on coffee and pure determination. Her Chicago Bears hoodie was a gift from Maya, who'd saved her allowance for 3 months to buy it. Her jeans had a small hole in the knee from when she'd collapsed in the hospital parking lot after getting the news that Maya's condition was worse than anyone had realized. Her sneakers were scuffed and comfortable, chosen for their ability to handle 18-hour days, pacing hospital corridors, not for making fashion statements in airport priority lanes. But appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. Dr. Vanessa Hayes held 3 engineering degrees, including a doctorate in aerospace engineering from MIT. She had spent the last 12 years revolutionizing aviation safety protocols for the Federal Aviation Administration. The emergency boarding procedures Marcus Riley thought he was enforcing? She had written them, the passenger assessment algorithms he relied on. She had designed them, the very computer system he used to determine who belonged in first class and who didn't. She had built it. Marcus Riley, however, saw none of that. What he saw was a black woman in casual clothes standing in a space he had decided she didn't deserve. At 42, Marcus had been a gate agent for 18 years, and he had learned to view his podium not as a customer service desk, but as a fortress. From behind that elevated counter, he was the king of Gate C-15. He decided who boarded early and who waited until the final call. He determined whose carry-on was too bulky and whose emotional support animal was disruptive. He controlled who got the coveted window seats and who got stuck in the middle seat next to the lavatory. Marcus took pride in what he called maintaining the aesthetic of the priority lane. He believed first class had standards, and those standards weren't just about ticket prices. They were about appearances, about the kind of people who fit in premium cabins. He had never written these beliefs down in any official capacity, and the airline certainly didn't train agents to profile passengers based on clothing or skin color. But Marcus had developed his own unofficial protocol over the years, a set of visual assessments that he used to determine who belonged where. Tonight, looking at Dr. Vanessa Hayes, every one of those assessments told him she was in the wrong place. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice dropping into that particular register of false politeness that service workers use when they want to establish dominance while maintaining plausible deniability. "Economy boarding begins in 20 minutes. You'll need to step aside. We're boarding our premium passengers right now." Vanessa looked up from her phone where she had been reading updates from Maya's medical team in London. Her daughter's potassium levels were becoming unstable. The surgery needed to happen within the next 36 hours, or the window would close permanently. Every minute mattered, and now this man was telling her to step aside. "I am a premium passenger," she said quietly, her voice rough with exhaustion and stress. "I'm in seat 1A. Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't the kind of laugh that suggested anything was funny. It was the kind of laugh designed to humiliate, to signal to everyone within earshot that this woman had just said something absurd. He looked at the line of passengers forming behind her. A man in an expensive suit checking his Rolex, a woman with a Hermes handbag containing a tiny dog, a teenager wearing headphones that cost more than most people's monthly car payment. He winked at the man in the suit. "Look, sweetheart," Marcus said, leaning over his podium with the air of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow. Seat 1. A is the bulkhead first-class suite on this aircraft. It costs $12,000. Now, I don't know if you're confused about your seat assignment or if someone told you that you could sweet-talk your way into an upgrade, but I need you to step aside. You're blocking the flow for actual premium passengers. Behind Vanessa Elena Rodriguez was having the worst first week of her career. At 26, she had just been hired as a junior gate agent after completing her training program, and she was still learning the computer systems and protocols. But even as a newcomer, something about this interaction felt wrong to her. She had been checking the passenger manifest for Flight SK447, and she had noticed something unusual about Seat 1A. The booking wasn't just marked as premium or first class. It was flagged with codes she hadn't seen before: critical transport and federal priority. Elena glanced at her training materials, trying to remember what those designations meant, but before she could speak up, Marcus continued his public dismantling of Dr. Hayes. "I've been doing this job for 18 years, Marcus announced to the gate area, his voice now carrying the tone of someone who enjoyed having an audience for his authority. "And I've seen every scam in the book. People who print fake boarding passes from sketchy websites. People who think they can talk their way into seats they can't afford. People who think the rules don't apply to them because they're special somehow." He gestured toward Vanessa with obvious disdain. "But here's the thing about first class. It's not just about the money. It's about the kind of people who belong in that environment. It's about maintaining a certain standard, a certain aesthetic. And right now you are not meeting that standard." Dr. Vanessa Hayes stood perfectly still, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her back. She had experienced this kind of discrimination before, of course. Growing up in Detroit, she had been the only black girl in her advanced placement classes constantly questioned about whether she really belonged there. In college, she had been asked if she was there on an athletic scholarship, professors assuming that her intelligence couldn't possibly be the reason for her presence at MIT. In graduate school, she had been mistaken for a janitor while working late in the engineering lab despite wearing a student ID badge. But this was different. This wasn't about academic achievement or professional recognition. This was about her daughter's life. Every minute she spent standing in this airport was a minute stolen from Maya's chances of survival. And this man, this small petty tyrant with his plastic badge and his inflated sense of power, was literally standing between her and her child's future. Sir Vanessa said, her voice gaining a slight edge of steel. "My name is Dr. Hayes. I have my boarding pass right here. If you would just scan it, you'll see that I am exactly where I'm supposed to be." She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her messenger bag. The boarding pass looked worse for wear. It had been folded and refolded dozens of times during her frantic journey from Chicago to get the medical clearances needed for Maya's surgery. It was stained with coffee from her 18-hour shift at the hospital where she had been consulting on Maya's case. It looked nothing like the pristine mobile boarding passes that the other first-class passengers were displaying on their iPhone screens. Marcus looked at the paper in Vanessa's hand and physically recoiled. "Ma'am, I'm not scanning a crumpled piece of paper that you probably printed off some scam website. Real first-class passengers don't carry boarding passes that look like they've been through a garbage disposal. You haven't even looked at my name," Vanessa said, her exhaustion beginning to transform into something harder and more dangerous. "My name is Dr. Vanessa Hayes. If you check your manifest, you'll see exactly why I'm here. I don't need to check the manifest to know you don't fit the profile," Dr. Marcus replied, putting sarcastic air quotes around her title. "We have a dress code for first class. We have standards, and right now you are loitering in a space where you don't belong. Security is right over my shoulder. Do you want to fly today, or do you want to spend Christmas in a holding cell explaining to the police why you were trying to board a flight with fraudulent documents?" The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Around them, the gate area had gone quiet in the way that public spaces do when something ugly is happening and no one knows whether to intervene or pretend they don't see it. The man in the expensive suit, Brad Morrison, a private equity executive who flew first class twice a week, cleared his throat impatiently. "Come on, Lady Brad," said his voice carrying the particular entitlement of someone who had never been questioned about whether he belonged somewhere. "Some of us have places to be. Move it along." Dr. Vanessa Hayes looked at Marcus Riley. She looked at Brad Morrison. She looked at the growing line of passengers behind her, most of whom were staring at their phones rather than acknowledge what was happening in front of them. She thought about Maya lying in a hospital bed 3,000 miles away, asking the nurses every hour when Mommy was coming to make her heart better. She thought about Dr. Webb, who had agreed to perform an impossibly complex surgery on the condition that he had access to every piece of Maya's medical history, and the specialized surgical approach that Vanessa had helped develop. She thought about the fact that if she didn't make it to London in the next 18 hours, her daughter would die. And then she made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to ask you one last time," Vanessa said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more authority than Marcus's shouting had. "Scan my boarding pass, read my name, do your job." "And I'm telling you," Marcus snapped, his face flushing red with the anger of someone whose authority had been questioned in public, "to get out of my line before I ban you from this airline for life." He pointed a finger toward a row of plastic chairs against the far wall. "Sit over there. Wait until every other passenger is boarded. If there's space near the toilets, maybe I'll let you on." Maybe. The humiliation washed over Vanessa like a wave, hot and prickling and familiar. But beneath it, something else was clicking into place. The gears of a machine much larger than Marcus Riley's petty kingdom were beginning to turn. Vanessa Hayes had spent her entire career building systems designed to prevent exactly this kind of abuse of power. She had created protocols specifically to ensure that critical passengers, people traveling for medical emergencies, federal investigators, safety inspectors, could never be blocked by gate agents who thought they knew better than the computer systems. What Marcus didn't know was that Dr. Hayes wasn't just a passenger on flight SK447. She was also the lead engineer for Operation Clean Sweep, a covert federal investigation into discrimination in the aviation industry. For the past 6 months, she had been documenting patterns of bias at airports across the country, building cases against airlines that allowed their employees to profile passengers based on appearance rather than actual documentation. Gate C-15 at Chicago O'Hare had been flagged as a particular problem area, with multiple complaints about a specific agent who seemed to have his own rules about who belonged in premium cabins. Tonight, traveling to save her daughter's life, Dr. Hayes had inadvertently become both the investigator and the test case. "Okay," Vanessa said quietly. She picked up her bag. "I'll step aside." She walked over to the plastic chairs and sat down. She didn't scream. She didn't make a scene. She didn't threaten to sue or demand to speak to a manager. She simply took out her phone. Not the smartphone that Marcus expected, but a specialized device that looked like an old iPhone but was actually a direct communication link to federal aviation authorities. The number she dialed wasn't a customer service hotline. It wasn't the airline's complaint department. It was a direct line to the FAA Emergency Operations Center, a number that bypassed every layer of bureaucracy and connected directly to the people who had the power to ground aircraft, shut down airports, and end careers with a single phone call. Marcus watched her sit down and smirked. He turned to Brad Morrison as he scanned the businessman's pristine mobile boarding pass. "Another crisis averted," he muttered. "Some people just don't know their place." He had no idea that the woman in the Chicago Bears hoodie had just initiated Federal Aviation Emergency Protocol Alpha 7, a procedure that had only been used 12 times in the history of American aviation. He had no idea that somewhere in a windowless room in Washington, D.C., alarm systems were starting to beep and federal investigators were being pulled out of their Christmas Eve dinners. He had no idea that he had just picked a fight with the one person in America who had the power to shut down every flight in the sky. But he was about to find out. As Marcus continued the boarding process, charming the elite passengers and basking in the power of his position, Elena Rodriguez was staring at her computer screen in growing horror. The critical transport flag next to Dr. Hayes' name wasn't just a booking note. It was a federal designation that meant this passenger was traveling under government priority for matters of national security or extreme emergency. Elena clicked through the system's help files trying to understand what she was seeing. According to the documentation, passengers with critical transport status were supposed to receive immediate assistance, priority boarding, and direct communication with flight operations. Gate agents were specifically instructed never to delay or question these passengers under any circumstances. Any interference with a critical transport passenger was supposed to be reported immediately to federal authorities. Elena looked across the waiting area at Dr. Hayes, who was typing furiously on her phone. She looked at Marcus, who was now telling a story to another passenger about the entitled woman he had just put in her place. She looked at her computer screen where Dr. Hayes' name was now blinking red with urgent system alerts. And Elena Rodriguez, 6 days into her new career, realized she was watching her supervisor commit what might be a federal crime. The security alert on Elena's screen wasn't just blinking now. It was pulsing like a heartbeat, each flash accompanied by a low chime that she prayed Marcus couldn't hear over the noise of the boarding process. She clicked on the alert message and her blood turned cold. Critical transport passenger detained at Gate C-15. Federal notification protocols initiated. All flight operations on hold, pending resolution. Elena's hands trembled as she scrolled through the passenger details. Dr. Vanessa Hayes. Doctorate in Aerospace Engineering, MIT. Current position, Lead Safety Engineer, Federal Aviation Administration. Emergency Contact Director Patricia Valdez, FAA Operations Center. The file went on for pages. Security clearances, federal authorizations, a list of achievements that read like something out of a movie. But it was the bottom line that made Elena's stomach drop. Passenger currently transporting critical medical documentation for emergency surgery. Delay of this flight could result in loss of life. Elena looked at Dr. Hayes, who was still sitting in the plastic chair, speaking quietly but urgently into her phone. Then she looked at Marcus, who was scanning boarding passes with the satisfied air of someone who believed he had successfully defended his territory from an unwelcome invader. Mr. Riley Elena said, her voice barely audible over the din of the gate area. "Sir, I think you need to look at something." Marcus didn't turn around. He was focused on a family with expensive luggage making small talk about their vacation plans. "Not now, Rodriguez. Can't you see I'm busy with actual passengers?" Elena felt her face flush with embarrassment and fear. She had been working for less than a week, and she was about to contradict her supervisor in front of dozens of passengers. But the computer screen in front of her was now showing alerts from multiple federal agencies. The FBI, the Department of Transportation, the TSA, even the Department of Homeland Security, all because Marcus Riley had decided that a woman in a hoodie couldn't possibly belong in first class. Meanwhile, 30 feet away, Dr. Vanessa Hayes was having the most important phone conversation of her life. "This is Dr. Vanessa Hayes, authorization code Alpha 77 Delta," she said into her phone. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "I am currently being denied boarding at Chicago O'Hare Gate C-15 by an agent who refuses to scan my boarding pass or check his manifest." On the other end of the line, Director Patricia Valdez of the FAA Emergency Operations Center was pulling up files on her computer. Patricia had known Vanessa for 8 years, ever since recruiting her from MIT to revolutionize aviation safety protocols. She knew that Vanessa never called the emergency line unless there was a genuine crisis, and she knew that Vanessa was currently in the middle of a family emergency that had already required federal intervention to expedite travel arrangements. "Vanessa." "What's your situation?" Patricia asked, her voice crisp and professional, but tinged with concern. "My daughter's surgery is in 18 hours. I have the medical documentation that Dr. Webb needs to operate. The gate agent has declared my boarding pass fraudulent and is threatening to have me arrested if I don't move to economy. He won't scan the pass. He won't check his manifest. He's operating purely on visual assessment." Patricia's jaw tightened. She had been working in federal aviation for 22 years, and she had seen this pattern before. Gate agents who developed their own unofficial rules about who belonged where. Airlines that turned a blind eye to discrimination as long as it didn't make the news. Passengers who were humiliated, delayed, or denied service because someone in a uniform decided they didn't fit the profile. But Patricia had never seen a case where a federal employee on emergency transport had been targeted. And she definitely had never seen a case where the victim of discrimination was the same person who had designed the protocols meant to prevent exactly this situation. "What's the agent's name?" Patricia asked. "Marcus Riley," Vanessa replied, glancing at his name tag. "And Director Valdez. He's not just refusing to board me, he's making a public spectacle of it. There are passengers filming. This is about to be all over social media." Patricia closed her eyes. In the age of viral videos and instant outrage, discrimination stories could explode across the internet in minutes. And when the victim was a federal employee whose child was dying, the public relations catastrophe would be absolutely nuclear. "Vanessa, I'm initiating Emergency Protocol 7. That flight is grounded until you're in your seat. I'm also dispatching federal security to your location. This will be resolved in the next 15 minutes. What about Maya?" Vanessa asked, her professional composure finally cracking. "Patricia, if I miss this surgery window..." "You won't," Patricia said firmly. "I promise you, you will make that surgery. But first, we're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." As Vanessa ended her call, she noticed that a young woman across the waiting area had been watching her with interest. Jessica Liu, a travel blogger with a modest but engaged following, had been documenting her holiday travel experience when she noticed the confrontation at the gate. Something about the interaction had felt wrong to her. The gate agent's aggressive posture, the passengers' dignified calm, the obvious racial dynamics at play. Jessica had started filming when Marcus began his dress code speech, and she had captured the entire humiliation on video. Now, watching the passenger make what appeared to be a very serious phone call, Jessica realized she might be witnessing something much bigger than a standard travel complaint. She opened her TikTok app and started a live stream. "Hey everyone, Jessica here currently at Chicago O'Hare, where I just witnessed something pretty disturbing," she said, holding her phone at an angle that showed both the gate area and her face. A gate agent just refused to let a black woman board her flight, claiming her boarding pass was fake and that she didn't fit the profile for first class. The woman is now sitting alone making phone calls while the agent continues boarding other passengers. The comments started immediately. "This is disgusting. Someone help her. Get this agent's name. Record everything." Within minutes, Jessica's stream had 500 viewers, then 1,000, then 2,000. People were sharing the stream, tagging their friends, demanding to know which airline would allow this kind of treatment. But Jessica wasn't the only one documenting the situation. Robert Davies, a retired military colonel who flew frequently for his consulting business, had also noticed the confrontation. With 30 years of experience in military logistics and personnel management, Robert recognized the signs of a power-drunk authority figure abusing someone who couldn't fight back through normal channels. He had seen it in the military. Junior officers who developed their own interpretations of regulations. Sergeants who decided which soldiers deserved respect and which ones didn't. It was always the same pattern, someone with a small amount of power using that power to hurt someone they perceived as vulnerable. Robert began taking notes on his phone, documenting the time, the gate number, the agent's name and badge number, and the specific words he had heard. If this woman decided to file a complaint, she would need witnesses, and if this situation escalated, someone needed to have a detailed record of exactly what had happened. Meanwhile, Brad Morrison was beginning to feel uncomfortable. When he had first seen the confrontation, his instinctive reaction had been to side with the gate agent. Brad traveled first class constantly, and he had developed a sense of ownership over those premium spaces. He didn't like it when the cabins were cluttered with people who didn't seem to belong. Families with small children, people in casual clothes, anyone who disrupted the quiet, exclusive atmosphere he paid extra to enjoy. But as he watched Dr. Hayes sitting alone in the plastic chair, something about her dignity and composure began to eat at him. She hadn't argued or made a scene. She hadn't claimed discrimination or threatened to sue. She had simply asked to have her boarding pass scanned, and when that request was denied, she had stepped aside exactly as instructed. Brad found himself thinking about his own daughter, who was about the same age as the girl he could see in the photos on Dr. Hayes' phone case. What if his daughter was sick and his wife was trying to get to her? What if some power-hungry agent decided that his wife didn't look like she belonged in first class? The thought made Brad deeply uncomfortable, and for the first time in years, he began to question his reflexive assumption that authority figures were probably right, and complainers were probably wrong. Back at the gate podium, Marcus was in his element. He had successfully defended the integrity of the first-class cabin, put an entitled passenger in her place, and demonstrated to the other passengers that he wouldn't tolerate anyone trying to scam their way into premium services. He felt righteous and powerful the way he always did when he successfully identified and stopped what he believed to be fraudulent behavior. Zone 2 now boarding. Zone 2, Marcus announced into his microphone. He loved the authority in his voice, the way passengers immediately responded to his instructions. This was his kingdom, and he ruled it well. But Elena Rodriguez was reaching a breaking point. The alerts on her computer screen were now coming every 30 seconds, and she had counted at least 6 different federal agencies that had opened files on the situation at Gate C-15. She had tried 3 more times to get Marcus's attention, but he had dismissed her each time with increasing irritation. Mr. Riley Elena tried once more, her voice louder and more urgent. "Sir, you really need to look at this passenger's file. There are federal alerts." Rodriguez Marcus snapped, finally turning away from his boarding duties to face her. "What part of not now don't you understand? We have a schedule to maintain, and I don't need a rookie telling me how to do my job. The woman is sitting exactly where she belongs, and we're boarding legitimate passengers. End of discussion." Helena stared at him in disbelief. She had been polite. She had been respectful. She had tried to save him from what was clearly going to be a career-ending mistake. But Marcus was so convinced of his own authority, so certain that his visual assessment trumped federal computer systems, that he was willing to ignore every warning sign in front of him. Elena made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She reached for her personal cell phone and started recording. "The time is 7:03 p.m., she said quietly into her phone's camera. "Gate Agent Marcus Riley at Chicago O'Hare. Gate C-15 has refused to board a passenger with federal priority status despite multiple computer alerts and my repeated attempts to inform him of the situation. The passenger, Dr. Vanessa Hayes, is currently sitting alone, while Mr. Riley continues boarding other passengers." As Elena spoke, her phone captured Marcus in the background, joking with a passenger about people who think they can talk their way into first class. It also captured the computer screen behind him, which was now flashing red with urgent federal alerts. Elena ended the recording and immediately uploaded it to a secure federal reporting system that she had learned about in her training. Within minutes, the video would be in the hands of TSA supervisors, airline executives, and federal investigators. But the most important call was still to come. At 7:05 p.m., exactly 18 minutes after Dr. Hayes had sat down in the plastic chair, Marcus Riley's phone rang. Not his personal cell phone, but the official airline operations phone that sat on the gate podium. It was a call that came through the highest priority channels, bypassing every layer of airport management and connecting directly to Gate C-15. Marcus picked up the phone with the casual confidence of someone who assumed it was a routine operational update. "Gate C-15. Marcus speaking. This is Director Patricia Valdez, Federal Aviation Administration Emergency Operations Center," the voice on the other end said. "Am I speaking to Gate Agent Marcus Riley?" Marcus felt his stomach drop. He knew that name. Every airline employee knew that name. Director Valdez was the person who had the power to ground aircraft, shut down airports, and end careers with a single decision. She was not someone who called gate agents directly unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus stammered, his voice suddenly losing all of its earlier authority. "This is Marcus Riley. Is there a problem with our flight?" "Mr. Riley, you have a passenger at your gate named Dr. Vanessa Hayes. According to our records, you have refused to board Dr. Hayes and have threatened to have her arrested. Is this accurate?" Marcus looked across the waiting area at Dr. Hayes, who was now standing and walking back toward the gate. For the first time, he noticed that other passengers were watching the situation with interest rather than annoyance. He noticed that some people had their phones out, not checking email or playing games, but pointing cameras in his direction. "Ma'am," the passenger in question presented a suspicious boarding pass and didn't meet the appearance standards for first-class travel, Marcus said, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "I was following standard protocols for preventing fraud and maintaining cabin integrity." Mr. Riley, Director Valdez said, her voice dropping to a tone that could have frozen water. "Dr. Hayes is the lead engineer for Federal Aviation Safety Protocols. She is currently traveling under emergency authorization to transport critical medical documentation for a child's life-saving surgery. She has higher security clearance than most airline executives, and she literally wrote the standard protocols you think you were following." The phone went silent except for the sound of Marcus's breathing, which had become rapid and shallow. Furthermore, Director Valdez continued, "Dr. Hayes has been conducting a federal investigation into discrimination in the aviation industry. Your treatment of her tonight has been documented by multiple witnesses and recorded by federal investigators. Mr. Riley, you haven't just denied boarding to a premium passenger, you have interfered with a federal investigation and potentially endangered a child's life." Marcus felt the world spinning around him. He looked at Dr. Hayes, who was now standing directly in front of his podium. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. She just looked tired and sad and determined. Director Valdez, Dr. Hayes said, taking the phone from Marcus's limp grip. This is Vanessa. I need to be in London in 16 hours. Can we resolve this quickly? Dr. Hayes' Director Valdez replied, her voice warm with relief and respect. Federal Security is en route to assist you. Your flight will receive priority clearance for immediate departure as soon as you're aboard. And, Dr. Hayes, I'm sorry. This should never have happened. Dr. Hayes looked at Marcus, who was staring at her with the expression of someone watching his entire world collapse. Around them, the gate area had gone completely silent. Passengers were openly filming now, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Mr. Riley, Dr. Hayes said quietly, you asked me earlier what kind of people belong in first class. Let me tell you what I've learned in my career. It has nothing to do with what someone is wearing or how they look. It has everything to do with whether they have a ticket and whether they're treating other people with basic human dignity. She held up her boarding pass, the same crumpled piece of paper Marcus had refused to scan. I'd like to board my flight now. My daughter is waiting for me. Marcus reached for the boarding pass with hands that were visibly shaking. For the first time all evening, he actually looked at what was printed on the paper, instead of making assumptions based on its appearance. The barcode scanned immediately. The screen flashed green, and suddenly every computer in the gate area displayed the same message: priority passenger, federal authorization, immediate boarding required. Marcus looked up at Dr. Hayes, then at Elena's computer screen, then at the dozens of passengers who were now openly recording the interaction. He finally understood that he hadn't just made a mistake. He had destroyed his career, humiliated himself in front of hundreds of witnesses, and potentially caused the death of a child, all because he thought he could judge someone's worth by looking at their hoodie. Doctor, Hayes Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. Your seat is ready. First class seat 1A. But Dr. Hayes wasn't listening to Marcus anymore. She was looking at Elena Rodriguez, the young gate agent who had tried multiple times to prevent this disaster. You knew, Dr. Hayes said to Elena. You tried to warn him. Elena nodded, tears in her eyes. I saw the alerts on the computer. I tried to tell him, but he wouldn't listen. Dr. Hayes smiled for the first time all evening. What's your name? Elena Rodriguez, ma'am. I just started here last week. Well, Elena Rodriguez, Dr. Hayes said you're going to go far in this industry. Thank you for trying to do the right thing. As Dr. Hayes walked toward the jet bridge, the crowd of passengers began to applaud. Not the polite golf clap of people acknowledging someone's achievement, but the sustained emotional applause of people who had witnessed justice being served. Brad Morrison, the businessman who had earlier told Dr. Hayes to move it along, stepped forward as she passed his seat. Ma'am, he said, his face red with shame. I owe you an apology. I was wrong to support him, and I'm sorry for the way you were treated. Dr. Hayes paused and looked at him. Thank you for saying that, she said simply. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong. Jessica Liu was still live streaming, and her viewer count had exploded to over 25,000 people. Comments were pouring in faster than she could read them, but the themes were clear outrage at Marcus's behavior, admiration for Dr. Hayes's dignity, and demands for accountability from the airline. This is incredible, Jessica said to her phone camera as Dr. Hayes disappeared into the jet bridge. We just watched a gate agent discover that he had picked a fight with literally the worst possible person. And we watched a federal engineer handle discrimination with more grace and professionalism than I've ever seen. This is going to change how airlines handle these situations. But the story was far from over. As Dr. Hayes took her seat in the first-class cabin, federal security teams were arriving at Gate C-15. Patricia Valdez herself was boarding a plane in Washington, D.C., flying to Chicago to personally oversee the investigation. And in a London hospital, an 8-year-old girl named Maya Hayes was telling her nurses that her mommy was coming to fix her heart and that nothing in the world could stop her. Marcus Riley stood at his podium watching his computer screen flash with alerts and notifications that he finally understood. He had spent 18 years believing that his job was to keep the wrong people out of the right spaces. Tonight he had learned that his job was actually to help people get where they needed to go regardless of how they looked or what assumptions he wanted to make about them. And he had learned it far too late to save his career. The federal agents arrived at Gate C-15 exactly 23 minutes after Dr. Hayes had first been told to step aside. They didn't announce themselves with fanfare or dramatic entrances. They simply appeared. 3 men and 2 women in dark suits walking with the purposeful stride of people who had official business to conduct. They moved through the crowded gate area like water flowing around rocks, passengers instinctively stepping aside without being asked. Agent Sarah Martinez was the first to reach Marcus Riley's podium. At 38, she had spent 12 years investigating civil rights violations in transportation, and she could read the dynamics of a discrimination situation like a detective reading a crime scene. The gate agent's defensive posture, the passenger's isolated position, the crowd of onlookers with their phones out. She had seen this exact configuration dozens of times before. "Agent Martinez, FBI Civil Rights Division," she said, showing her badge to Marcus. "Mr. Riley, I need you to step away from the podium, please." Marcus felt his legs go weak. FBI. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was here at his gate because of a passenger he had refused to board. He looked around desperately, hoping to see his supervisor or someone from airline management who could explain that this was all a misunderstanding, that he had just been doing his job according to company policy. But there was no one coming to save him. His supervisor was at home celebrating Christmas Eve with his family, blissfully unaware that one of his gate agents had just triggered a federal investigation. The airline's customer service managers were dealing with weather delays throughout the terminal, assuming that Gate C-15 was running smoothly under Marcus's experienced management. And the executives who would ultimately have to answer for this situation were asleep in their suburban homes, their phones still set to silent mode for the holiday weekend. Agent Martinez Marcus said, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was just following standard procedures for verifying passenger documentation and maintaining cabin safety standards." Agent Martinez looked at him with the expression of someone who had heard this exact defense countless times before. "Mr. Riley, did you scan Dr. Hayes's boarding pass? The document appeared suspicious. Did you scan it?" "No, ma'am." "But did you check her name against the passenger manifest?" "I made a visual assessment based on—" "Mr. Riley." Agent Martinez interrupted, her voice cutting through his explanations like a blade. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Did you check Dr. Hayes's name against the passenger manifest?" Marcus swallowed hard. "No, ma'am." "Thank you for your honesty." Agent Martinez turned to Elena Rodriguez, who was standing behind the counter looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Miss Rodriguez, I understand you attempted to alert Mr. Riley to alerts on the computer system." Elena nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes, ma'am. Multiple times. The system was showing federal priority flags, but he wouldn't look at the screen." "And did you document your attempts to inform him?" "Yes, ma'am. I recorded video on my personal phone and uploaded it to the federal reporting system." Agent Martinez smiled for the first time since arriving at the gate. "Good thinking, Ms. Rodriguez. That documentation will be very helpful in our investigation." Meanwhile, Jessica Liu's live stream had exploded across social media. Her viewer count had jumped to over 50,000, and the video was being shared across Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok faster than the platform algorithms could track. GateGate was trending nationally, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of discrimination in airports, hotels, and retail stores. But Jessica wasn't the only one documenting the federal response. Robert Davies, the retired military colonel, had positioned himself where he could capture both the FBI agents and Marcus's reactions on his phone camera. As someone who had spent decades in situations where documentation could mean the difference between justice and cover-ups, Robert knew the importance of having multiple independent records of what was happening. "This is unprecedented," Robert murmured into his phone's microphone, providing real-time commentary for a video he planned to submit as evidence. I've never seen federal agents respond this quickly to a civil rights complaint. This passenger must be someone extremely important, or this situation must be much worse than it initially appeared. Agent Martinez was now interviewing the passengers who had witnessed the initial confrontation. She spoke first to Brad Morrison, the businessman who had initially supported Marcus but had later apologized to Dr. Hayes. Mr. Morrison, you were standing directly behind Dr. Hayes when she was first denied boarding. Can you tell me exactly what the gate agent said? Brad shifted uncomfortably, knowing that his answer would be recorded and potentially used in federal proceedings. He said that first class was for people who actually belonged there, not whatever this is. He refused to scan her boarding pass because it was crumpled, and he said she didn't fit the profile for first-class passengers. Did he specify what he meant by profile? Brad closed his eyes, remembering words that he was now ashamed to have heard without protest. He talked about maintaining the aesthetic of the first-class cabin. He said there were standards about the kind of people who belonged in that environment. Agent Martinez made notes on her tablet. And what was your initial reaction to this interaction? This was the question Brad had been dreading. I initially sided with the gate agent. I told Dr. Hayes to move along because some of us had places to be. His voice dropped to nearly a whisper. I was wrong. I made assumptions based on how she was dressed, and I was completely wrong. Agent Martinez looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your honesty. Recognizing our biases is the first step toward changing them. As the FBI continued their interviews, Dr. Hayes was settling into Seat 1A aboard Flight SK447. The first-class cabin felt like a different world. Soft leather, warm lighting, and the kind of respectful service that she had been denied just an hour earlier. But she couldn't relax. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to Maya's surgery deadline, and she still had 8 hours of flying ahead of her. Captain Michael Torres had been flying commercial aircraft for 22 years, and he had never received the kind of direct communication from the FAA that had come through his cockpit systems tonight. Federal priority passengers were rare enough, but federal priority passengers traveling under emergency medical protocols were almost unheard of. Captain Torres left his co-pilot to handle the pre-flight systems and walked back to Seat 1A to personally check on Dr. Hayes. Dr. Hayes, he said, crouching down beside her seat. I'm Captain Torres. I want you to know that we've been cleared for immediate takeoff as soon as the FBI completes their work at the gate. We'll have priority routing all the way to London, and we'll make up any lost time in the air. Vanessa looked up at him with exhausted gratitude. Captain, my daughter's surgery is scheduled for 7 a.m. London time, if we're delayed much longer. We won't be, Captain Torres said firmly. I have clearance to use emergency routing protocols. We'll get you there in time. As Captain Torres returned to the cockpit, Dr. Hayes pulled out her phone to check for updates from Maya's medical team. What she found instead was a flood of messages from friends, colleagues, and strangers who had seen Jessica's live stream and other videos of the incident. Vanessa. I just saw the video from Chicago. I'm so proud of how you handled that situation, but I'm furious that it happened at all. Dr. Patricia Valdez. Dr. Hayes. This is Dr. Webb in London. I've seen the news coverage. Maya is stable and we're ready whenever you arrive. The whole surgical team is rooting for you both. Dr. Harrison Webb. Mom, the nurses showed me the video of you at the airport. You're my superhero. I love you. Maya Hayes dictated to nurse. That last message broke something open in Vanessa's chest. Maya had seen the video. Her 8-year-old daughter, lying in a hospital bed thousands of miles away, had watched her mother be humiliated and threatened by a man who thought he had the right to decide where she belonged. But Maya hadn't seen humiliation. She had seen her mother standing up for what was right, maintaining her dignity in the face of injustice, and ultimately proving that truth and justice were more powerful than bias and ignorance. Back at Gate C-15, Agent Martinez was conducting the most important interview of the evening. Marcus Riley sat in a plastic chair, the same kind of chair where Dr. Hayes had been forced to wait, while Agent Martinez asked him to explain his actions. Mr. Riley, in your 18 years as a gate agent, how many times have you refused to scan a passenger's boarding pass? Marcus thought, carefully knowing that his answer would be checked against airline records. I'm not sure. Maybe 5 or 6 times when the documents appeared obviously fraudulent. And in those previous cases, did the passengers turn out to actually have fraudulent documents? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Not always. Sometimes there were errors in the system, or the passengers had legitimate documents that just looked suspicious. So you've previously denied boarding to passengers who turned out to have legitimate tickets. Yes, but those were honest mistakes. This situation was different. How was it different, Mr. Riley? Marcus opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. How could he explain that this situation felt different without admitting that his decision had been based on racial profiling? How could he justify his actions without acknowledging that he had made assumptions about Dr. Hayes based on her appearance rather than her documentation? She didn't look like she belonged in first class. He finally said the words coming out in a rush before he could stop them. Agent Martinez set down her tablet and looked at him directly. Mr. Riley, what does someone who belongs in first class look like? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus knew there was no good answer, no way to explain his aesthetic standards that wouldn't sound exactly like what they were. Discrimination based on appearance, race, and class assumptions. I don't know how to answer that, he admitted. Mr. Riley, I've reviewed your employment history and the complaints filed against you over the past 2 years. There's a pattern here. 17 different passengers have alleged that you subjected them to additional scrutiny or denied them services based on their appearance. 16 of those passengers were people of color. Do you see a pattern there? Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. He had never thought of himself as racist. He had black coworkers, Hispanic neighbors, Asian friends from college. He wasn't someone who used slurs or joined hate groups. He was just someone who believed in standards, in maintaining order, in keeping first class exclusive for the people who deserved it. But looking at Agent Martinez's data, seeing his own behavior laid out in black and white, Marcus was forced to confront the possibility that his standards had been nothing more than bias dressed up as policy. I never meant to discriminate against anyone, he said weakly. Intent isn't what matters here, Mr. Riley. Impact is what matters. And the impact of your actions has been to exclude passengers of color while providing those same services to white passengers without question. Elena Rodriguez was watching this interview from across the gate area, and she was learning more about workplace discrimination in 10 minutes than she had learned in her entire life. She thought about her training where instructors had emphasized the importance of following procedures and treating all passengers equally. But they had never explained how to recognize when a supervisor was violating those principles or what to do when reporting discrimination might cost you your job. Elena thought about her student loans, her rent, her family members who were counting on her new income. She thought about how easy it would have been to stay quiet, to assume that Marcus knew what he was doing to avoid the confrontation that had led to FBI agents at their gate. But she also thought about Dr. Hayes sitting alone in a plastic chair while her daughter waited for life-saving surgery. She thought about all the other passengers who might face similar discrimination if no one was willing to speak up. Elena Rodriguez, 6 days into her airline career, realized that she had already learned the most important lesson of her professional life. Sometimes doing the right thing matters more than keeping your job. At 8:17 p.m., Agent Martinez received a call that would escalate the situation even further. Director Patricia Valdez had landed in Chicago and was en route to the gate. But more importantly, the airline's CEO had been reached at his Christmas Eve dinner and was flying back to Chicago on a company jet. The legal department was mobilizing. The media relations team was preparing statements. And somewhere in a corporate boardroom, executives were calculating the potential cost of a federal civil rights lawsuit filed by a prominent government engineer. Mr. Riley Agent Martinez said, closing her tablet. You're going to be escorted to airport security for further questioning. This investigation is just beginning, and I need you to understand that you're facing potential federal charges for civil rights violations under federal transportation law. Marcus felt his world collapsing around him. Federal charges, criminal prosecution, the end of his career and possibly his freedom, all because he had looked at a woman in a hoodie and decided she didn't belong in first class. Agent Martinez Elena Rodriguez said, stepping forward. I have additional documentation that might be relevant to your investigation. Elena pulled out her personal phone and showed Agent Martinez the recording she had made. This shows Mr. Riley ignoring multiple computer alerts about Dr. Hayes' federal priority status. I tried to inform him 4 separate times and he dismissed me each time. Agent Martinez watched the video with the expression of someone who had just been handed the key piece of evidence in an important case. Elena's recording showed not just Marcus's initial discrimination, but his continued refusal to acknowledge his mistake even when federal systems were explicitly flagging Dr. Hayes as a priority passenger. Ms. Rodriguez, this is excellent documentation. I assume you're willing to testify about what you witnessed? Elena nodded, though she was terrified about what testifying might mean for her career. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Hayes deserves justice and other passengers deserve protection from this kind of treatment. As Elena spoke, Jessica Liu was conducting her own interview with Robert Davies for her live stream. Robert had become an unofficial spokesman for the passengers who had witnessed the discrimination, and his military background gave him credibility with viewers who might otherwise dismiss the situation as overblown. Colonel Davies, Jessica said, holding her phone so that both their faces were visible in the frame. You've been in leadership positions where you've had to make quick decisions about people. What went wrong here? Robert looked directly into the camera with the bearing of someone who had spent 30 years taking responsibility for difficult situations. What went wrong here is that a person in authority decided he knew better than the systems and procedures he was supposed to follow. He made assumptions based on appearance rather than facts. And when presented with evidence that his assumptions were wrong, he doubled down instead of admitting his mistake. What should have happened differently? Simple Robert said. The gate agent should have scanned the boarding pass, checked the manifest, and boarded the passenger. Takes 30 seconds. Instead, he created a federal incident that's going to cost the airline millions of dollars and potentially cost him his freedom. Jessica's live stream was now being watched by over 100,000 people, and major news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. CNN's travel correspondent was on her way to Chicago. The Wall Street Journal was calling airline executives for comment. Social media was exploding with discussions about discrimination in air travel and the power of viral video to force accountability. But perhaps the most important viewer was Maya Hayes, who was watching Jessica's stream on a tablet in her London hospital room. Maya didn't understand all the legal terminology or the broader implications of what had happened to her mother. But she understood that her mom had been treated badly by someone who was supposed to help her, and that other people had stood up to make sure it didn't happen again. Nurse Patricia Maya said to the woman adjusting her IV, "My mom is famous now." "Yes, sweetheart, she is. She's famous for being brave and standing up for what's right." "When I grow up," Maya said with the seriousness that only 8-year-olds can muster, "I'm going to help people like my mom does. I'm going to make sure nobody gets treated badly just because of how they look." Nurse Patricia smiled, thinking about how this little girl's heart surgery was going to be successful, and how she was going to grow up to change the world, just like her mother was doing right now. At 8:45 p.m., flight SK447 finally pushed back from the gate. Dr. Hayes was in her seat. The medical documents were secure in her bag, and Captain Torres had received clearance for the fastest possible routing to London. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Dr. Hayes looked out her window at the terminal where she had been humiliated less than 2 hours earlier. She thought about Marcus Riley, whose career was over and whose future was uncertain. She didn't feel triumphant about his downfall. She felt sad that it had taken a federal investigation and potential criminal charges to teach him a lesson that should have been learned in childhood. Treat people with respect regardless of how they look or what assumptions you want to make about them. But she also felt hopeful. Elena Rodriguez had shown courage in standing up to her supervisor. Brad Morrison had found the strength to acknowledge his own bias and apologize for it. Jessica Liu had used her platform to document injustice and demand accountability. Robert Davies had provided the steady voice of authority that helped other passengers understand what they were witnessing. Change was possible. People could learn. Systems could be improved. And sometimes it took one terrible moment of injustice to galvanize everyone around the truth that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. His flight, SK-447, lifted off into the snowy Chicago night, Doctor. Vanessa Hayes closed her eyes and thought about Maya waiting for her in London. In 8 hours, she would be holding her daughter's hand as she was wheeled into surgery. The medical plans that could save Maya's life were safely in her bag, and nothing was going to stop her from delivering them. She had stood up to bias and won. She had maintained her dignity in the face of humiliation and emerged stronger. And she had shown the world that justice, while sometimes delayed, is never ultimately denied to those who have the courage to demand it. The plane climbed toward cruising altitude, carrying Dr. Hayes toward her daughter and toward a future where this kind of discrimination would be much harder to get away with. Below them, Chicago grew smaller and smaller until the terminal where it all started was just another cluster of lights in the darkness. But the impact of what had happened at Gate C-15 was just beginning to spread across the world. Director Patricia Valdez arrived at Chicago O'Hare at 9:23 p.m., stepping off a government jet into the chaos of a terminal in crisis mode. The airport's senior management team was waiting for her on the tarmac. People who had been pulled away from family dinners and holiday celebrations to manage what was rapidly becoming the biggest civil rights incident in the airline's history. Patricia didn't waste time with pleasantries. At 51, she had spent her entire career in federal aviation, working her way up from a junior engineer to the second highest position in the FAA. She had handled plane crashes, terrorist threats, and congressional investigations. But she had never handled a case where one of her own engineers had been discriminated against while traveling to save her child's life. "Where is Agent Martinez?" Patricia asked as she strode through the terminal, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown timer. "Gate C-15. Ma'am," replied Thomas Anderson, the airport's general manager. "The FBI has secured the area and is conducting interviews. The gate agent in question is being held for federal questioning, and the media CNN and the major networks have crews en route. Social media coverage has exploded. The hashtag Gategate is trending worldwide. We're getting calls from news outlets in 6 different countries." Patricia nodded grimly. She had expected this. In the age of viral videos and instant outrage, discrimination stories could circle the globe in hours. When the victim was a federal employee whose child was dying, the story became international news. But Patricia's first concern wasn't media management. It was justice. At Gate C-15, she found Agent Martinez concluding her interviews with the passengers who had witnessed the discrimination. Elena Rodriguez was sitting in a corner looking shell-shocked but determined. Marcus Riley was nowhere to be seen. He had been escorted to a secure questioning room where FBI agents were taking a formal statement. "Agent Martinez," Patricia said, showing her federal identification. "I'm Director Valdez. What's the status of your investigation?" Agent Martinez stood and handed Patricia a tablet containing her preliminary findings. "Director, we have multiple witnesses confirming a pattern of discriminatory behavior. The gate agent refused to scan Dr. Hayes' boarding pass based purely on visual assessment. He made explicit statements about passengers not fitting the profile for first-class service. We also have video documentation of the incident and computer logs showing he ignored multiple federal alerts." Patricia scrolled through the evidence, her expression growing darker with each page. "And the airline's response? The CEO is flying back from Connecticut. Their legal team is mobilizing. But, Director, there's something else you need to know. Agent Martinez led Patricia to Elena's computer terminal where federal alerts were still flashing across the screen. This wasn't an isolated incident. We've identified a pattern of complaints against this specific gate agent over the past 2 years. The airline has been aware of the pattern but failed to take corrective action. Patricia's jaw tightened. Individual discrimination was bad enough. Institutional tolerance of discrimination was a federal crime. Agent Martinez, I want a full investigation of the airline's complaint handling procedures. If they've been ignoring or suppressing discrimination reports, they're going to face criminal charges as a corporation. Meanwhile, 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, Dr. Hayes was finally able to focus on what mattered most: Maya's surgery. She had spread the medical documents across her tray table and was reviewing every detail of the surgical approach that she and Dr. Webb had developed over months of consultation. Maya's heart defect was exceptionally rare, a condition that affected fewer than 1 in 1,000,000 children. The standard surgical approaches had a high failure rate, but Dr. Webb had pioneered a new technique that could save Maya's life. The problem was that the technique required precise understanding of Maya's unique anatomy, which was why Vanessa's documentation was so critical. As she worked, Vanessa became aware that the flight attendants were treating her with extraordinary care. Linda Martinez, the lead flight attendant, had quietly arranged for her to have complete privacy in the first-class cabin. Other passengers had been relocated to give her space to work. Coffee appeared at her elbow without her asking. When she needed to make calls to Maya's medical team, Linda ensured that the satellite phone connection was crystal clear. Dr. Hayes, Linda said during one of her checks, "Is there anything else you need? We've been instructed to provide whatever support you require." Vanessa looked up from the medical charts, surprised by the level of attention. "This is very kind, but I don't need special treatment. I'm just trying to get to my daughter." Linda smiled gently. "Dr. Hayes, with respect, you've done something tonight that's going to change how airlines treat passengers forever. The least we can do is make sure you can focus on saving your little girl's life." It was then that Vanessa realized the full impact of what had happened at Gate C-15. This wasn't just about one gate agent's bias or her own family's crisis. This was about every passenger who had ever been told they didn't belong somewhere because of how they looked. This was about changing a culture that allowed discrimination to flourish as long as it stayed quiet. Back in Chicago, the consequences for Marcus Riley were becoming clear. He sat in a windowless room at airport security facing FBI agents who were documenting every detail of his employment history. His union representative had arrived, but even she seemed overwhelmed by the scope of the federal investigation. "Mr. Riley Agent Martinez said, reviewing his file, we've now identified 23 separate complaints alleging discriminatory treatment from you over the past 2 years. 21 of those complaints involved passengers of color. Can you explain this pattern?" Marcus's lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, leaned forward. "Agent Martinez, my client has never received formal discipline for discrimination. If there were legitimate complaints, surely the airline would have taken action. That's exactly what we're investigating, Ms. Walsh. It appears that complaints against Mr. Riley were either dismissed without investigation or handled through internal processes that failed to address the underlying behavior." Marcus felt a new wave of panic. He had always assumed that the absence of formal discipline meant his actions were acceptable. He had never considered that the airline might simply be looking the other way, hoping problems would resolve themselves without negative publicity. "I want to be clear about something," Agent Martinez continued. "This investigation isn't just about tonight's incident. We're looking at a pattern of civil rights violations that may have affected dozens of passengers. Mr. Riley, you're facing potential criminal charges under federal civil rights law." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Criminal charges, federal prosecution, prison time. All because he had tried to maintain what he thought were appropriate standards for his gate. Meanwhile, Elena Rodriguez was getting a very different kind of attention. Director Patricia Valdez had personally interviewed her about the events at Gate C-15, and she was impressed by Elena's courage and documentation. Mrs. Rodriguez, Patricia said you've been on this job for less than a week, and you showed more integrity and professionalism than your supervisor demonstrated in 18 years. How did you know to record the situation? Elena twisted her hands nervously. Director, during our training, they emphasized the importance of documentation and following protocols. When I saw the federal alerts on the computer, I knew something was seriously wrong. I tried to report it through normal channels, but when that failed, I felt like I had to create a record of what was happening. And you understood that challenging your supervisor might cost you your job. Yes, ma'am. But letting him discriminate against a federal priority passenger seemed worse than losing my job. Patricia nodded approvingly. Ms. Rodriguez, the FAA is always looking for people with your combination of integrity and judgment. When this investigation is complete, I'd like to discuss some opportunities that might interest you. Elena's eyes widened. 6 days ago, she had been a recent graduate hoping for any job in the aviation industry. Tonight, the director of the FAA was offering her career opportunities because she had done the right thing in the face of pressure to stay quiet. As the night wore on, the story continued to explode across social media and traditional news outlets. Jessica Liu's live stream had been viewed over 500,000 times, and her interview with Colonel Davies had been picked up by major news networks. Gategate was trending in 14 countries, with millions of people sharing their own experiences of discrimination in travel, retail, and hospitality settings. But the most powerful response came from an unexpected source. Dr. Maya Hayes, despite being only 8 years old and preparing for major surgery, had asked the nurses to help her record a video message. "Hi, everyone," Maya said from her hospital bed, her voice weak but determined. "I'm Maya, and my mom is the lady from the airplane video. I wanted to tell you that my mom is the bravest person in the world, and she's coming to London to fix my heart tomorrow." The video showed Maya holding a photo of herself and her mother, both wearing Chicago Bears jerseys. Some people were mean to my mom because of how she looked, but she didn't give up. She stood up for what was right, and now she's helping other people too. When I grow up, I want to be brave like my mom. The video went viral within hours, shared by celebrities, politicians, and millions of ordinary people who were moved by a child's faith in her mother's courage. Maya Strong began trending alongside Gategate, with people around the world sending messages of support and encouragement. At 11:47 p.m. Chicago time, the airline's CEO, David Richardson, finally arrived at O'Hare. Richardson had built his career on operational efficiency and customer satisfaction, and he was facing the worst public relations crisis in the company's history. His legal team had already informed him that the potential liability from Dr. Hayes' treatment could reach tens of millions of dollars, especially if federal investigators found evidence of institutional discrimination. Richardson went directly to the secure area where federal agents were conducting their investigation. He had one goal: to personally apologize to Dr. Hayes and begin the process of making the situation right. But when he arrived at Gate C-15, he learned that Dr. Hayes was already in the air, racing toward London and her daughter's surgery. Director Valdez Richardson said, extending his hand, "I'm David Richardson, CEO of the airline. I want to personally apologize for Dr. Hayes' treatment and assure you that we will cooperate fully with your investigation." Patricia looked at him with the expression of someone who had heard similar promises from corporate executives many times before. "Mr. Richardson, apologies are nice, but what I need from your company is accountability. Your employee didn't just discriminate against a passenger. He interfered with a federal investigation and endangered a child's life. And according to our preliminary findings, this wasn't an isolated incident." Richardson felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean by not isolated?" Agent Martinez stepped forward with her tablet. "Mr. Richardson, we've identified multiple complaints against the gate agent in question, as well as similar patterns of behavior from other employees. Your company's complaint resolution system appears to have failed to address discrimination." The word "failed" hit Richardson like a hammer. Corporate liability for widespread civil rights violations carried penalties that could bankrupt even large companies. He was looking at federal prosecution, massive financial settlements, and congressional investigations that could destroy his airline's reputation permanently. Director Valdez Richardson said, his voice heavy with the weight of impending corporate disaster. "What can we do to make this right?" Patricia considered the question carefully. She had the power to recommend criminal charges against both individuals and the corporation. She could push for maximum penalties that would send a message to the entire airline industry. But her primary concern wasn't punishment. It was prevention. "Mr. Richardson, here's what's going to happen. Your company will implement a comprehensive bias training program designed by federal civil rights experts. You will establish an independent complaint resolution system with direct federal oversight. You will compensate Dr. Hayes for her treatment and create a scholarship fund for aviation students from underrepresented communities, and you will submit to federal monitoring of your employment and customer service practices for the next 5 years. Richardson nodded quickly. The terms were harsh, but they were better than criminal prosecution and corporate bankruptcy. "Agreed. Whatever you think is appropriate. And Mr. Richardson, Marcus Riley will never work in the aviation industry again. Not for your airline, not for any airline, not in any capacity that involves contact with passengers." As federal agents continued their investigation throughout the night, Marcus Riley sat in the security office facing the complete collapse of his life. His 18-year career was over. His pension was gone. His reputation was destroyed. He faced potential federal prosecution and certain industry blacklisting. But perhaps the worst part was realizing that he had brought this on himself. He had created his own unofficial rules about who belonged where. He had ignored training about equality and bias. He had dismissed computer alerts and refused to listen to a colleague who tried to help him avoid disaster. Marcus Riley had spent 18 years believing that his job was to keep the wrong people out of the right places. Tonight, he learned that his job had actually been to help people get where they needed to go, regardless of what he thought about their appearance or their right to be there. And he had learned that lesson far too late to save his career, his reputation, or his freedom. As sunrise approached over Chicago, flight SK447 was beginning its descent into London Heathrow. Dr. Hayes had worked through the night finalizing every detail of Maya's surgical plan and coordinating with the medical team. In 6 hours, she would be holding her daughter's hand as Maya was wheeled into the operating room. The discrimination at Gate C-15 felt like a lifetime ago. What mattered now was Maya's surgery and her recovery. But Dr. Hayes knew that the events of the past 24 hours had changed something fundamental about how the aviation industry would handle passengers in the future. She had stood up to bias and won. She had maintained her dignity in the face of humiliation. And she had proven that sometimes one person's courage to demand justice can change an entire system. Below them, London was waking up to a new day. And in a hospital room in the heart of the city, an 8-year-old girl was waiting for her mother to arrive and make everything better. The plane touched down at Heathrow at exactly 6:42 a.m. London time, 18 minutes ahead of schedule. Dr. Hayes gathered her documents, said goodbye to the flight crew who had taken such good care of her, and walked off the plane toward the most important appointment of her life. Behind her, she left a trail of changed lives, reformed policies, and a promise that no other passenger would ever be told they didn't belong somewhere because of how they looked. The real work was just beginning. Dr. Vanessa Hayes had never run through an airport before. In all her years of professional travel, she had always maintained a measured pace, arriving with plenty of time to spare, moving with the controlled efficiency of someone who planned for every contingency. But at 6:45 a.m. London time, racing through Heathrow Terminal 5 with Maya's surgical plans clutched against her chest, she ran like her daughter's life depended on it. Because it did. The British authorities had arranged for her to bypass immigration and customs, whisking her through normally restricted areas with the kind of official urgency usually reserved for heads of state. A police escort waited at the terminal exit. Not the ceremonial motorcade of dignitaries, but the practical high-speed response of emergency services mobilized to save a life. As the police car raced through London's morning traffic, Vanessa called Maya's hospital room. The call was answered immediately by Dr. Harrison Webb, the cardiac surgeon who had agreed to operate on Maya using the innovative approach they had developed together. Dr. Webb. Vanessa said, her voice breathless from running and exhaustion. "I'm 15 minutes away." "How is she stable?" "But we need to move quickly." Dr. Webb replied, his voice carrying the calm urgency of someone who had spent 30 years performing life-saving surgery. "Maya's been asking for you every 5 minutes since midnight. She refuses to go to sleep because she wants to see the surgical plans that Mommy helped make." Vanessa felt her throat tighten. Even facing major surgery. Maya was thinking like the engineer she was destined to become, wanting to understand every detail of the process that would save her life. "Dr. Webb, the plans are complete. Every measurement, every contingency, every possible complication we discussed. It's all documented. Excellent." Dr. Hayes. "I want you to know that what happened to you in Chicago has been all over the news here. The entire surgical team has been following the story. We're not just operating on Maya today. We're operating on the daughter of a woman who stood up for justice when it mattered most." The police car pulled up to the hospital's emergency entrance at 7:02 a.m. Vanessa thanked the officers and ran through the automatic doors past the reception desk directly to the elevators that would take her to Maya's floor. The hospital staff had been expecting her. Nurses pointed the way, orderlies stepped aside, and Dr. Webb himself was waiting when the elevator doors opened on the cardiac unit. "Room 314, Dr. Webb said, falling into step beside Vanessa as they hurried down the hallway. She's been awake for the past hour, telling the nurses that her mom was flying across the ocean to bring her heart the instructions it needed to get better. Vanessa stopped outside Maya's door, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of everything that had happened in the past 18 hours. The discrimination, the federal investigation, the viral videos, the worldwide attention. All of it had started because she was trying to get to this moment, to this room, to her daughter. "Dr. Webb," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if something goes wrong? What if we missed something in the plans? What if—" Dr. Webb placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Dr. Hayes, you've given us everything we need to save Maya's life. Your documentation is the most thorough I've ever seen. But more than that, you've shown Maya what it means to fight for what matters. That strength, that determination. She's going to carry that into surgery with her." Vanessa nodded, took a deep breath, and pushed open the door to room 314. Maya was awake, sitting up in bed despite the early hour, her dark eyes bright with excitement and anticipation. She was wearing a hospital gown covered in cartoon hearts, a gift from the nursing staff who had fallen in love with the brave little girl who talked constantly about her brilliant engineer mother. Mommy Maya's voice was weak but filled with joy. "You made it. Did you bring the heart instructions?" Vanessa rushed to Maya's bedside, careful not to disturb the various monitors and IV lines, and wrapped her daughter in the gentlest hug of her life. "I brought everything, baby girl. Every instruction, every measurement, every detail that Dr. Webb needs to fix your heart perfectly." Maya pulled back to look at her mother's face. "Mommy, the nurses showed me the videos from the airplane. That man was really mean to you." Vanessa felt her chest tighten. She had hoped Maya wouldn't see the videos of the discrimination, wouldn't have to know that her mother had been humiliated while trying to save her life. "Yes, sweetheart, he was. But you know what I learned. What I learned that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it's scary. And I learned that there are more good people in the world than bad people. Lots of people helped Mommy get to you." Maya nodded solemnly. "Like the lady who took the videos, like the lady who took the videos, and the other passengers who stood up for what was right, and the police who helped me get to the airport quickly. and the doctors here who stayed up all night to make sure everything was ready for your surgery. Mommy? Maya said, her voice dropping to the serious whisper that 8-year-olds use for important conversations when my heart gets fixed. Are you going to help other people, like those people helped us? The question hit Vanessa with unexpected force. In all her focus on Maya's surgery and the immediate crisis they were facing, she hadn't fully processed what the viral videos and federal investigation meant for the future. Millions of people had watched her stand up to discrimination. Thousands had shared their own stories of bias and humiliation. The entire aviation industry was being forced to confront its tolerance for prejudice. She had a choice. She could return to her quiet life as a federal engineer, grateful that her daughter was alive and hoping that the attention would fade. Or she could use the platform that this crisis had given her to create lasting change for other families who might face similar discrimination. Yes, Maya Vanessa said, understanding for the first time what her real mission would be when this was over. I'm going to help other people. We're going to make sure that no other mommy gets treated badly when she's trying to help her child. Maya smiled, satisfied with her mother's answer. Good, because that wasn't fair and you always teach me to fix things that aren't fair. Dr. Webb appeared in the doorway, accompanied by the surgical team that would operate on Maya. Dr. Hayes, it's time. Maya, are you ready to get your heart fixed? Maya looked at her mother, then at Dr. Webb, then at the nurses who had become her friends over the past week. Dr. Webb, my mom helped make the instructions for my surgery, right? That's right, Maya. Your mom is a brilliant engineer and she helped us plan exactly how to fix your heart. Then I'm ready, Maya announced with the confidence of someone who had complete faith in her mother's abilities. If my mom helped plan it, I know it's going to work perfectly. As the medical team prepared Maya for surgery, Vanessa realized that her phone had been buzzing constantly with messages and notifications. She had ignored them during her rush to the hospital, but now she glanced at the screen and was overwhelmed by what she saw. Messages from colleagues, friends, and strangers from around the world. Videos of support from other parents whose children had faced medical crises. Updates from the investigation in Chicago. News reports about the changes that airlines were already implementing in response to the viral videos. But the most important message came from director Patricia Valdez. Vanessa Maya's story has touched the world. When you're ready, we have work to do. This is bigger than one gate agent's bias. This is about changing how entire industries treat people. Rest up, save your daughter, and then let's save everyone else. At 8:15 a.m. London time. Maya was wheeled into surgery. Vanessa walked alongside the gurney as far as the hospital would allow, holding Maya's hand and whispering words of love and encouragement. I'll be right here when you wake up, Vanessa promised as they reached the operating room doors. I know, Mommy. You came all the way across the ocean for me. You're not going anywhere now. The surgery took 6 hours and 14 minutes. Dr. Webb and his team worked with the precision and care of craftsmen using the detailed plans that Vanessa had helped develop to navigate the complex landscape of Maya's unique heart defect. Every measurement was exact. Every decision was informed by months of preparation. Every movement was guided by the love of a mother who had crossed oceans and fought discrimination to give her daughter this chance. Vanessa spent those 6 hours in the waiting room, surrounded by other parents facing their own crises, but also connected to the world through her phone and laptop. The story of her confrontation with Marcus Riley had continued to spread, but it was evolving into something larger than just one incident of discrimination. Airlines around the world were announcing new training programs. Airport authorities were reviewing their complaint procedures. Congress was scheduling hearings on bias in transportation. And thousands of people were sharing their own stories of discrimination, creating a movement that demanded dignity and respect for all travelers regardless of their appearance. But none of that mattered to Vanessa as much as the moment when Dr. Webb emerged from the operating room with a tired but triumphant smile on his face. Dr. Hayes, he said, still wearing his surgical scrubs, the operation was a complete success. Maya's heart is functioning perfectly. The new technique worked exactly as we planned. She's going to make a full recovery. Vanessa felt her knees go weak with relief. Can I see her? She's still sedated, but she's stable and strong. You can sit with her while she recovers. Maya looked impossibly small in the recovery room, surrounded by monitors and machines that were tracking every aspect of her healing. But her color was already better. Her breathing was steady, and the surgical team was confident that the worst was behind them. Vanessa pulled a chair up to Maya's bedside and took her daughter's hand. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that everything was going to be okay. At 3:47 p.m. London time, Maya opened her eyes. Her first words were typical. Maya, did it work? Is my heart fixed? It worked perfectly, Vanessa said, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Webb says you're going to be completely healthy. Maya smiled weakly, but with complete happiness. I knew it would work. You helped plan it. As Maya rested and recovered, the world continued to respond to the story that had started at Gate C-15 in Chicago. The hashtag MayaStrong had become a global phenomenon, with children in hospitals around the world sharing messages of support and encouragement. The aviation industry was implementing changes that would protect passengers from discrimination, and Marcus Riley's career destruction had become a cautionary tale taught in business schools and civil rights seminars. But for Vanessa Hayes, sitting in a London hospital room holding her daughter's hand, the most important outcome was simple. Maya was alive, Maya was healthy, and they had a future together. 3 days later, as Maya continued to recover and grow stronger, Vanessa received a call that would define the next phase of her life. It came from Patricia Valdez, but she wasn't calling as the director of the FAA. She was calling as the chair of a new federal task force on transportation discrimination. Vanessa. Patricia said, I won't sugarcoat this. What happened to you in Chicago is happening to passengers every day across the country. The difference is that you had the resources and the platform to fight back. Most people don't. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that you lead a new federal initiative to eliminate bias in transportation. Real oversight, real consequences, real change. The President has authorized a comprehensive review of civil rights enforcement in aviation, rail, and bus transport. We need someone who understands the technology, the industry, and the human cost of discrimination. Vanessa looked at Maya, who was coloring in a book while connected to monitoring equipment. Her daughter had survived heart surgery and was going to live a full, healthy life. But there were other children whose families might not get the same chance if they faced discrimination when seeking medical care. Patricia, why accept? But I have 2 conditions. Name them. First, Maya comes with me. She's been through this experience too, and children's voices need to be heard in these conversations. Agreed. What's the second condition? We don't just change policies. We change hearts and minds. We make sure that what happened to us never happens to another family. 6 months later, Dr. Vanessa Hayes testified before Congress about her experience at Chicago O'Hare. Maya, now fully recovered and healthy, sat in the gallery wearing a dress covered in small airplanes, a gift from the flight crew of SK-447 who had taken care of her mother during the flight to London. Vanessa's testimony was clear, powerful, and personal. She spoke about the fear of missing Maya's surgery. She spoke about the humiliation of being told she didn't belong in a space she had paid to occupy. She spoke about the courage of people like Elena Rodriguez, who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. But most importantly, she spoke about the future, about the changes that had already been implemented, about the training programs that were teaching airport staff to see passengers as individuals rather than stereotypes, about the complaint systems that actually investigated bias rather than dismissing it, about the children like Maya who would grow up in a world where their parents' skin color didn't determine how they were treated when seeking help. Maya's heart surgery was successful, Vanessa concluded her testimony, but the healing that needs to happen in our transportation system is just beginning. We have an opportunity to create a culture where every passenger is treated with dignity regardless of their appearance or their background. The question is whether we have the courage to do the work." The committee room erupted in applause. But the real measure of success wasn't the applause of politicians. It was the email Vanessa received that evening from Elena Rodriguez, who was now working as a civil rights compliance officer for the FAA and had just completed her first investigation of bias at a major airport. Dr. Hayes Elena wrote, "We prevented 3 discrimination incidents this month because of the new protocols you helped design. 3 families didn't have to go through what you went through. 3 children got to see their parents treated with dignity. Thank you for showing me that doing the right thing is always worth it." As Vanessa read the email, Maya came running into the room, her energy fully restored after her surgery. She was carrying a drawing she had made at school, a picture of an airplane with 2 figures visible in the window labeled Mommy and Maya flying to help other families. "Mommy Maya said my teacher says that because you stood up to that mean man at the airport, other kids' mommies and daddies won't get treated badly anymore. That's right, sweetheart. Sometimes when something bad happens to us, we can use it to make sure good things happen for other people." Maya nodded with the wisdom of a child who had learned early that life could be unfair, but that unfairness could be fought. "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to help people like you do. I want to make sure everyone gets treated nicely." Vanessa hugged her daughter, thinking about the long journey that had brought them from that plastic chair at Gate C-15 to this moment of hope and purpose. The discrimination had been horrible. The fear for Maya's life had been devastating. But the response, the federal investigation, the policy changes, the awakening of consciousness about bias in transportation had created something positive from something terrible. Maya Vanessa said, "You already are helping people. Just by being brave during your surgery, just by understanding that fairness matters, just by having a kind heart, you're already making the world better." That night, as Maya slept peacefully in her own bed for the first time in months, Vanessa stood at her window looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, other families were traveling, other children were sick, other parents were fighting for their kids' lives. But now, because of what had happened at Gate C-15, because of Elena's courage and Jessica's documentation and Patricia's leadership and Maya's strength, those families would face less discrimination and more dignity. The man who had told her she didn't belong in first class had been wrong about everything. She belonged wherever her love for her daughter took her. She belonged in the fight for justice. She belonged in the movement for change. And Maya belonged in a world where her mother's skin color didn't determine how they were treated when they needed help the most. The healing was complete. The heart that mattered most was the one that beat with love, courage, and hope for a better future. Dr. Vanessa Hayes had saved more than her daughter's life. She had saved the possibility that other families would be treated with the dignity that every human being deserved. And that more than any federal investigation or viral video or congressional testimony was the victory that would last forever. 1 year after that December night at Chicago O'Hare, the Hayes Protocol became federal law at every airport in the United States. Gate agents now receive mandatory bias training every 6 months, with Dr. Vanessa Hayes' story serving as the primary case study. Marcus Riley's discrimination is taught in aviation management courses nationwide as a cautionary tale of how unconscious prejudice can destroy careers and devastate innocent families. The training isn't theoretical, it's personal, featuring video testimonials from passengers who have experienced discrimination and airline employees who have learned to recognize and prevent bias before it escalates. Elena Rodriguez, now Director of Civil Rights Compliance for the FAA, oversees the implementation of these protocols. Her quick thinking and moral courage at Gate C-15 became a model for how employees can stand up to discrimination even when it means challenging authority. The federal reporting system she used to document Marcus's behavior has been expanded and simplified, making it easier for airline staff to report bias incidents and protect passengers from discriminatory treatment. Elena's story is taught alongside Vanessa's, proving that heroes come in all forms. Sometimes they're the passengers who demand justice, And sometimes they're the employees who risk their jobs to do what's right. Maya Hayes, now 9 years old and completely healthy, speaks at children's hospitals around the country about courage, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. She carries a small photo from that night in Chicago, her mother sitting with dignity in a plastic chair while surrounded by people who had underestimated her strength. "My mom didn't just save my life," Maya tells other sick children during her hospital visits. "She made sure that other mommies and daddies won't be treated badly when they're trying to help their kids." Sometimes the worst things that happen to us can help make the best things happen for other people. Maya's room is filled with letters from children whose families have benefited from the changes her mother's experience created. A little boy whose father wasn't questioned when he rushed to catch a flight to a family emergency. A girl whose grandmother was treated with respect despite wearing traditional clothing that made her look different to airport staff. Families of all backgrounds who now travel with confidence, knowing that discriminatory treatment will be investigated, documented, and punished. Marcus Riley's fate serves as a permanent reminder of the consequences of unchecked bias. After losing his job and facing federal investigation, he spent months unemployed and unemployable in the aviation industry. He now works at a community center in Chicago, teaching job skills to recently released inmates. The work is humbling and poorly paid, but it has taught him something that 18 years as a gate agent never did: how to see people as individuals rather than stereotypes. He occasionally speaks to airline employee training groups about his experience, though he can barely get through his presentations without breaking down when he talks about the child whose life he almost cost because he judged her mother by her clothes. The airline industry transformation has been swift and comprehensive. Airlines that once tolerated discriminatory behavior now face immediate federal oversight and financial penalties for any pattern of bias. Passenger complaints are investigated by independent civil rights officers rather than internal customer service departments. Airport staff receive training not just in procedures, but in empathy, learning to see every passenger as someone's mother, father, child, or sibling rushing toward something important. The changes extend beyond airlines. Hotels, rental car companies, and other travel-related businesses have adopted similar protocols after recognizing that discrimination anywhere in the travel experience reflects poorly on the entire industry. Conference centers train their staff using the Hayes Standard, the principle that every person deserves respect regardless of their appearance, their urgency, or their ability to match someone's expectations of what a customer should look like. Dr. Vanessa Hayes continues her work as a federal engineer while serving as a special advisor on transportation civil rights. Her technical expertise, combined with her lived experience of discrimination, has made her uniquely qualified to design systems that protect passengers while maintaining security and efficiency. She has spoken at conferences around the world, but her most important audience remains Maya, the daughter who inspired her to fight not just for one family's justice, but for every family's dignity. The viral videos from that night continue to be shared as teaching tools, but they've been joined by hundreds of other stories from passengers who now feel empowered to document discrimination and demand accountability. Jessica Liu's live stream sparked a movement of passenger advocacy, with travelers using social media not just to complain about delayed flights or lost luggage, but to shine light on bias and prejudice wherever it occurs. The hashtag #TravelWithDignity has become a rallying cry for equal treatment in all aspects of the travel industry. On quiet evenings when Maya is doing homework and Vanessa is reviewing engineering reports, they sometimes talk about that night in Chicago. Maya understands now that her mother's experience was part of something larger, a pattern of discrimination that had hurt countless families before them and would have continued hurting families after them if someone hadn't found the courage to say enough. "Mommy," Maya asked recently, "do you think that man at the airport learned his lesson?" Vanessa considered the question carefully, thinking about Marcus Riley and the reports she received about his work at the community center. "I think he's learning, sweetheart. Sometimes it takes losing everything you think is important to discover what actually matters. What's important isn't that he learned. What's important is that other people don't have to suffer for him to get an education. Maya nodded with the wisdom of a child who had seen both the worst and best of human nature. I'm glad we helped other kids, even though it was scary. Me too, Maya. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stand up when everything tells us to sit down. You taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when we are afraid. Dr. Vanessa Hayes' legacy isn't found in the federal investigations she sparked or the policies that bear her name. It's found in the thousands of families who now travel without fear of discrimination. The airline employees who've learned to lead with empathy instead of prejudice, and the children who grow up understanding that dignity isn't negotiable and justice isn't optional. Her story proves that sometimes the most powerful form of resistance is simply refusing to be made invisible. When someone tells you that you don't belong somewhere you have every right to be when they try to diminish your worth based on their assumptions about your appearance or your background, the most radical thing you can do is stand your ground with quiet dignity and demand to be treated as the full human being you are. Maya's heart beats strong and steady, now pumped by surgical precision and powered by her mother's love. But it also beats with the rhythm of justice, the understanding that fairness is something we must create together, one brave decision at a time, one person willing to stand up for what's right, one family willing to transform their pain into progress for everyone who comes after them. That's the true measure of Dr. Vanessa Hayes' victory. Not that she won her fight, but that fewer families will have to fight at all. This story has moved millions of people around the world, proving that courage and dignity can overcome even the most entrenched prejudice. If Dr. Vanessa Hayes' experience inspired you, if Maya's strength touched your heart, or if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with respect regardless of how they look, please hit that like button right now. Your support helps stories like this reach more people who need to hear them. Have you ever experienced discrimination while traveling? Have you witnessed bias in airports, hotels, or other public places? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and together we can continue the work that Dr. Hayes and Maya started that night in Chicago. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss these powerful stories of justice, courage, and hope. We're building a community of people who believe that dignity isn't optional and fairness isn't negotiable. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they belong everywhere they have a right to be. Share it with someone who works in customer service and could benefit from seeing how treating people with respect can literally save lives. Share it because stories like this have the power to change hearts, change minds, and change the world. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring, and thank you for being part of the change we need to see. Until next time, remember, your dignity matters, your voice matters, and you have the power to stand up for what's right. Stay brave, stay kind, and keep fighting for a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve.